So without further ado, let me bring up our next speaker, and please give a great start up Istanbul welcome to Vijay from Techstars.
Thank you very much. Hi there. Great to be here in Istanbul. What an audience, and what a pleasure to do this presentation right after lunch. Hope you guys are filled up, but I'll promise you not to fall asleep this afternoon. I've got 20 minutes, and I really want to talk a little bit about the lessons that I've learned scaling up companies. I had the pleasure, of course, at Techstars dealing with a lot of startups. As you probably heard me this morning giving advice as a mentor to founders, this is what I do for a living. You all know this, that there's about 1,000 startups that are being created every hour. In fact, China alone, it's like 11,000 a day. The question is, how are these startups going to be successful, right? There's only going to be a few companies, a few handful of companies that are going to be successful. Allow me to just give you my perspective from my experience as a serial entrepreneur and how I have observed these lessons over the years. So, I started business at the age of 12, family business with my dad. And I made a lot of observations being in retail, serving customers. And then over that, I grew my own business as I started as an entrepreneur. I've had 4 startups, 3 scale-ups. I've gone through 1 bankruptcy. If anyone here in the room gone through that, it's a wonderful experience. Not having to have any pocket in your money and living off your credit cards. And I've done about 28 angel investments. The industries I've been in is in VC, property development, manufacturing a lot, from garments to safety helmets to association management and so on. I've scaled companies from 0 to $150 million. I've managed a company with 1 employee to 3,000 employees. I've had operations in 160 countries around the world. And also I've burned $100 million in assets through a financial crisis. So that's a lot of fun. I've been in 4 distinct network organizations, right? I've served them in leadership capacities. I'm going to give you, from my lens, what I think startups are all about. The first one is, of course, Techstars, right? Show of hands, any one of you in the room heard of Techstars? Okay, we've got half the people here in the room. Quick kind of overview. We've invested in 2,000 startups over the last 10 years. We now have presence in 20 countries as far as accelerators are concerned. And we have our own fund, which we invest, and that's now into our 3rd iteration, which is $450 million combined over the last 10 years. Asset value of these companies right now, of the 2,000, is about $22 billion under management. We also work with a lot of corporates, companies like Barclays with FinTech, mobility, with Ford Motor Company, and so on and so forth. And now we've got 50 accelerators in 2020 across all possible verticals you can think about, from aviation to space to sports and what have you. But what's interesting is that, these companies that we've invested in have created a value of about $80 billion. Some of the companies you may recognize if you are developers, companies like DigitalOcean, SendGrid. I'm going to talk a little bit about SendGrid. SpillPack was acquired by Amazon last year for nearly $1 billion. Sphero is a company that worked with Disney, and they released the BB-8 robots in the movie Star Wars. So a lot of great companies have done great stuff. We've seen about 10% of these companies done an exit, about 200 companies, or 10% of our portfolio. But what is really remarkable is that nearly 90% of these companies are still thriving and active. Now you think about that typically 90% of companies in the first 2 years don't survive, right? But we see a lot of our portfolio companies really doing, their life. Some of them are doing much better than the others, but pretty much they're doing well. But they are also successful in fundraising. So in the first 12 months, 50% of them are actually successful in raising funds, usually about $2 to $3 million. Last year alone, in the last 12 months, our entire portfolio was fortunate to raise about $2 billion in the marketplace, right? And if you look at Series A, 1 in 20 companies in the United States that did a Series A fundraise was a Techstars company. So what I've seen is this, that companies who are successful have a very decent MVP, but they also have very decent, what I call repeatable, viable product. All right, so they just not release a product out there in the marketplace, they'll be able to see traction and build a flywheel. We'll talk a little bit about that. But also, they're able to prove the marketplace with a lot of traction in terms of revenue, sales, customer acquisition, and so on and so forth. So that's the observation for startups. I also have worked with the Entrepreneurs Organization. I was the CEO of this organization, which is based in D.C. We have presence in 160 cities. These are scale-ups that actually have a median revenue about $5 to $7 million, with a combined value of maybe $600 billion in terms of company revenue and sales. But their issues are a little different, right? Many of them have been quoted in the Inc. 500 magazine as fastest growing companies in the US. Their issues are more like to do with talent acquisition, because as they move from an entrepreneurial-driven company from, let's say, 10 employees to 50 employees, and then starting to build a C-suite, often they have this real big challenge of making that transition. And the second thing that you find is that they really struggle with putting a scalable infrastructure, whether it's cloud computing services for a software company, or for that matter, getting growth capital. How much equity can they give to afford VCs or private equity firms to come in to help them scale the business. And then I had the opportunity to also work with the Young Presidents Organization. This is one of the largest network of CEOs around the world. The combined revenue of these companies are about $6 trillion, employing about 6 million people. These are large corporations, banks, software companies, industries. Their issues are very different, right? They're more about leadership, about developing leaders in their organization. So typically they might have maybe 10,000 employees, and they look at how do you build the next generation of leaders. Sales is not really an issue, but how do you position yourself and how do you be effective in marketing, right? How do you get the message across that your brand, your enterprise is the leader in each industry? So their issues are how to be the number one and how do you stay in the number one or two positions in each of the sector marketplace. And finally, there's a lot of geopolitical issues happening right now with, for example, the US-China trade war is happening. A lot of US enterprises have now to scale back their expansion plans in China and vice versa. So if there's a question to be asked for you guys who are focused on startups, why is it so difficult to transition from a startup to a scale-up, then eventually an enterprise? There's one thing that I observed quite consistently over the last 25 years as a serial entrepreneur and working with startups right out to enterprise, and that is what I call the valley of death, right? So you find that at every stage of the business cycle, right, only a very few percentage is able to transcend from what do you call it, a success. And a success can be defined your first $1 million or your next $10 million in revenue and what have you. But you go through this cycle where we call it the valley of death. Either you get stuck with your initial stage of your MVP, you can't get it out the door. You don't have repeatable, success in terms of getting your product out. You don't get traction, or you can't build a team. You can't secure growth capital, or you can't secure the right talent. And this repeats itself from time to time. And it really needs a very unique individual or entrepreneur to be able to transcend from one to the other. So let's talk about where I think are 5 critical issues or factors that I think is quite consistently common across all these different stages. The first thing I would say to you is, has anyone in the room heard of a company called SendGrid? Okay, some of you heard about SendGrid. Let me tell you the SendGrid story, and I'll pick up from there as a lesson learned. So SendGrid was a company that went through our Techstars program in 2009. And after Techstars, they launched SendGrid. And the issue there was really solving one problem, and that one problem is the accuracy of emails going out. But 7 years later, in 2017, look at the revenues. It soared to $120 million. They send about 1 trillion emails. About 50% of the world's email today is processed by SendGrid. They're dealing with companies like Amazon and Facebook and what have you. And they've been profitable ever since. And then In 2017, November, they listed on the New York Stock Exchange, one of the very first companies that went from accelerator to IPO. And then was acquired by Twilio, another textile company, for $3 billion a few months later. And then recently, when you look at the stock price, they are valued about 13, 15 billion, depending on the price today. So when I asked the founder, Isaac, I said, what is that one thing that really fundamentally drove you to success? He says, look, on the very onset, I was passionate about the problem. How many of you had a Yahoo or Hotmail account? Okay, tells your age. So one of the things that I think as Isaac did was he had a Yahoo account, and a lot of his messaging was not getting across to his audience. And he said, I want to solve this. So having unsuccessfully dealing with Yahoo to solve that as a coder, he said, I want to get this accuracy out. So he was really passionate about that. And being a coder himself, he spent 4 weeks just coding out something and got his first release out. So what Isaac told me is that, relentlessly and unwavering, I would just focus on that one issue, want to be best in the market, and today he's created $3 billion worth of $3 billion company. The second issue is, I think, companies need to keep an eye on one metric. And I don't mean just revenue or sales or customer acquisition. It's the unique metric that really defines your business, all right? Vern Harnish is the founder of the Young Entrepreneurs Organization, a good friend of mine. Authored 2 big books, one called Rockefeller Habits and Scale Up. By the way, entrepreneurs in the room, if you're not reading a book a week, a book in 2 weeks, you're not keeping up with a lot of knowledge. You need to really expand your horizons with what thinkers are thinking about in terms of building frameworks in your mind, and then use those frameworks to really build a business, right? So some of the books I'm putting out here is really highly recommended. It's a great read. So one of the things that he talks about is really looking at a dashboard of various metrics, but it's just one metric really defines your business in a very big way. And then, of course, what we are famous for at Techstars is really do more faster. It's all about learning from the customer, getting feedback, iterating your product or your business model or your go-to-market strategy, and rapidly, generate this flywheel concept of really iteration and quick pivots as quickly as possible. So doing more faster and getting more done with less resources, less time. Both Brad and David are co-founders of Techstars, and they're very much well-respected in the area of venture capital. Also, a dear friend and someone I look up to is Jerry Porras, who I school at Stanford. He co-authored a book called Built to Last, and he talks about having the right people in the right seats. And now, one thing you've got to accept this is that when you're building a company from scratch, the people who are the closest to you, who are dedicated, loyal to you, some or other may not be the best team as you reach to a stage where you're 50 employees or 100 employees. You just got to accept that the levels of skills and competence will change and evolve based on your scalability of your company. So, I just want to add one more thing that I think, for me, having built businesses in $100 million and then having seen assets lost as well, keeping an eye on cash is really your number one goal as a CEO, right? You either are doing sales, generating cash, or you're fundraising. That's a lifetime job for you. You really don't have anything else to do as a CEO other than doing that. So keeping an eye on that these are the 5 things that I think are crucial, not just at the startup stage, but also in scale-ups and as you grow your business. So, in summary, as you're thinking about building a business today, right, what is most important is when you think about releasing a MVP, is think about one product, one market, or one customer. Don't be too ambitious to have a lot of features. Don't be too ambitious to think about, I'm going to go into 10 different markets if you haven't got traction in one market, right? Try to just focus on B2B or B2C. Make a call on that, okay? But the key to secret here is release your product as quickly as you can Do not wait for perfection, because what you're really seeking for is feedback, and that feedback loop is crucial to you to get traction. So if you release version 1.0 on Monday, be prepared to release 1.1 on Wednesday and 1.2 on Friday. Forget about waiting for 4 months and then release a version 1.0, which is the perfect version. So part of, you heard this before, part of releasing a product is to be able to embrace failure quickly, learn fast, and then move on. The second thing you want to think about is the business model. Many of the presentations I heard today had really clever ideas, very exciting addressable markets, but many of them really struggle to address the unit economics of the business. It doesn't come to them naturally, and it's not an easy one. But if you want my investment, you better prove to me the unit economics. One of the reasons why I think WeWork had a lot of trouble in the market in recent weeks is because they failed to convince the marketplace that their path to profitability was within reach. So they got hammered by the public markets. If you say you're not profitable today, that's perfectly okay. But demonstrate to me at least the path to profitability so that we know that when we invest in you, we can see the money coming back and reinvesting into customer acquisitions or product development. And once you can build a flywheel to say you're able to generate that cash flow and that ability to acquire customers without using more and more cash, then you got something really special happening there. And thereafter, it's all about execution. You need to nail this part down first and foremost before you can scale. And once you can do this, scaling comes naturally. Your ability then to go out to raise big capital, invest in people, invest in processes for you to really build a business, all right? So, start small, become best in the world at what you think you can become, however niche it is. That's really the secret. Try not to be too fluffy and big and ambiguous. And then you can expand into your markets, your products, and so on. I'm going to end there. I've got 2 minutes to 3 minutes for Q&A. But if anyone want to reach out to me right after this presentation to help you with the business, I'm available here today and tomorrow here in Istanbul. And if you want to talk about Techstars, please take a snapshot of that. My email is on that. I'm happy to help you in any way I can. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijay. We probably have time for 1 or 2 quick questions. Who's got a question for Vijay? Oh, come on. I have like 10, so come on. There you go. Speak good and loud, please.
I'm just thinking some of these startups, there is quite a lot of capital. So what makes us co-founders deserving all that capital as opposed to the rest of the team members who are working hard?
I don't think I got the full question. You said many of the startups raise a lot of capital, right?
Then what makes the co-founders deserve all that investments when very talented team members are already working?
Maybe what separates the co-founders that are investable from those that aren't. Is that maybe another way to say it? Okay.
That's a great question, by the way. Where are you from? London, all right. So I think one of the common things, you probably hear this repetitively, is the fact that at early stage companies, there isn't no much financials to go by. The technology is suspect because you don't really have maybe 1 or 2 quarters building the product at early stage. It's really the caliber of the team. And if you can prove credentials and the ability to execute, is really that has to come strongly, right? For me, the rest is then something is fixable. Whether it's your go-to-market strategy, whether it's building your technology, adding features to it, you can get a lot of mentors to help you. But if your fundamental 2 of your co-founders are not the best choice, then I'm sorry, you kind of shy away from that.
Cool. One more question. Yes, please.
How can we assure VCs that our startup won't fall in the value of the that you should, for example?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I think the key thing is that you will always, all of you, like it or not, will have a constant river of trouble, all right? And that's going to wash you down to the valley of death. It's your ability to pick yourself up on a day-to-day basis, right? And then demonstrate key traction or key milestones to say, in spite of all that I'm dealing with, internal and external issues, that I have the ability to keep on sustained growth and traction. So if it's not sales, it's customer acquisition. It's not customer acquisition, product iteration and releases and development. So as long as you can demonstrate there's good traction within the time frame of how you spend your time and resources, that's convincing enough.
A metaphor somebody once used about the valley of death, and I wonder if you agree, is it's almost like thinking of as a business matures, almost like thinking as a child growing. You know, crawling on the ground, a child can only get into so much trouble, but when they can reach the car keys or the liquor or whatever, as they mature, they can get into all sorts of different types of trouble and find their own valley of death and maturing through each of those stages like the business.
I agree, and I think the last one is that it's not the end of the world. That is only a natural path to success. That you have to go through a few, peaks and troughs to be able to navigate that. So just keep that in perspective as you build your business.
Let's thank Vijay.
Thank you.
And don't go too far, Vijay. If you want to go over, and we're going to start the next round of mentor session.